Hey everybody, this is the last chapter of No Talking by Andrew Clements. And if you'll remember from the last chapter, Dave has invited Mrs. Hyatt to join in with the kids with the whole no talking experiment. And I also said at the end of the last chapter that chapter 20 is called The Winners. So before I read it, I want you to take a moment to make a prediction. Good readers are often making predictions about what they think will happen in a book, and it really doesn't matter if your prediction is right or not. It just means that you're actively thinking about what you're reading about, and it helps you make better sense of what you're reading. So I'm going to make my prediction right now. I hope you do too. Okay, based on what I've learned about the main characters, Dave and Lindsay, and based on how the kids have been changing throughout the book, I think I have a prediction about what will happen in the chapter called The Winners, and I'll tell you about it at the end and you can compare it to your prediction. Here I go. At this point, it might be fun to tell how Dave followed the principal back to the cafeteria, and how Mrs. Hyatt apologized to the whole fifth grade by trading three-word phrases back and forth with Dave, who also apologized. And describing the looks on the faces of all those fifth graders in the cafeteria, not to mention Mrs. Marlowe and the rest of the staff, that might be fun too. Or it might be interesting to tell how Mrs. Hyatt called an all-school assembly 5 minutes later by chiming the school intercom and then saying, "Everyone, auditorium, hurry." And how all the teachers in every grade were given 5 minutes at the assembly to explain the new no-talking rules to their students, and how loud and confusing it was as they did that. And then how completely quiet it got when the principal announced, "Silence starts now." And it might be enlightening to explain how Mrs. Hyatt had changed the contest, so that the kids in kindergarten through fourth were competing grade against grade to see who could say the fewest illegal words during the next 23 hours, and why she thought her way was a better idea than boys against girls. And it might be thought-provoking to explain how Dave felt about all this. How he felt that he was sort of like Gandhi, and how Mrs. Hyatt was sort of like the British Empire, and how he felt like there had been a great victory with liberty and justice for all, which included Mrs. Hyatt herself. And Mr. Burton, there's a lot that could be told about him because he went completely stratospheric. He spent the last 24 hours of the contest scribbling down notes, taking photos, and using a little handheld recorder to capture as many three-word sentences as possible. He collected so much great material that he began thinking he could not only write that paper for his human development course, he could practically write a whole book about the way the kids and teachers at Laketon Elementary School had changed the way they expressed themselves, changed their view of language itself, what it is and how it works, and how communication can take so many different forms. And speaking of human development, it might be fun to explore why the very youngest kids could not even imagine how to go without something as amazing and powerful as talking, not even for 10 minutes, which is why the whole kindergarten was immediately excused from the activity. And how about Thursday morning, when the boys reported 0 honor system word goofs, and the girls reported only 1? Telling how Dave and Lindsay reacted to that news would be revealing. And then it would certainly be fun to peek at the challenges Mrs. Hyatt faced as she kept to a strict diet of 3 words at a time. On Wednesday afternoon and again on Thursday morning, she talked with parents, with the superintendent, with the principals of other schools, and with the electrician, who arrived to repair the milk cooler. And, of course, with her teachers and with hundreds of kids, all of whom thought it was great to have a principal who just might be a little crazy. In fact, the story could jump a whole week ahead, or even months ahead, to see the way fifth graders completed the school year as kinder, more careful talkers and thinkers. But because there's absolutely more to tell. There's always more. But as tempting as it is, it's not the time to tell about all that. Because this is the time to jump right to fifth grade lunch on Thursday, right to that point when the original contest was coming to an end, right to that moment of truth when the boys and the girls were getting ready to compare their final scores. Because with all the goodwill and the happy vibes that swirled out of Mrs. Hyatt's change of heart, plus the excitement of having the whole school go quiet, you might think that somehow the fifth grade boys against girls contest didn't matter anymore. But it did. Remember when Dave stood up and shouted at the principal on Wednesday? Did you think no one was counting? Not true. Everyone was counting. Dave had said 30 words, grand words, brave and true. However, all but 3 of them were illegal. At 12:14, 1 minute before the end of the contest, the cafeteria was silent. Every fifth grader was watching the second hand on the big clock, and so were all the fifth grade teachers, and Mrs. Hyatt, and the custodian, and the school secretary, and the school nurse, too. No one wanted to miss this moment in the history of the unshushables. Dave and Lindsay sat across from each other at the same lunch table, ready for the big tally. Dave dug around in his back pocket and found the crumpled sheet listing all the points against the girls. And Lindsay pulled out her little red notebook and a pencil from her backpack, and she bent over it, adding and scribbling away. Glancing down, Dave saw something poking out of the top pouch of Lindsay's backpack. A huge permanent marker, a red one. And Dave had no trouble at all imagining a big L on his forehead, because he already knew the final scores for both teams, and he was sure Lindsay did too. With just 15 seconds to go in the silent cafeteria, Lindsay stood up, looked down at the red notebook, took a deep breath, and she talked. I have to say this, my whole opinion changed. About boys, you really did the honor system great. And being quiet, also great. Everyone together. So, thanks. And then the second hand pointed straight up, and it was 12:15, and the contest was over. A yell went up that nearly peeled the tiles off the floor. Kids jumped out of their seats and ran and stood, bouncing face to face with groups of friends, and everyone jabbered faster and louder than human beings ever should, laughing and nodding and telling everybody everything they were thinking and feeling. And the louder it got, the louder everyone had to talk to be heard above the rising tumult. And the sound spiraled upward to that point where dogs run and stick their heads under a sofa. And amid the burst of joy and noise and confusion, Lindsay shouted to Dave, "What's the official count?" Dave nodded, cupped his hands around his mouth, and bellowed, 47 against the girls. Lindsay looked at her notebook. She didn't try to talk. It was too loud for that. She turned the notebook around, and at the bottom of the page a number was circled. 74 against the boys. A huge defeat. Lindsay gave him an odd little smile, and Dave was ready for the teasing to begin. She shouted, "You didn't count?" He was confused. Count? Count what? Lindsay yelled as loud as she could. What I said at the end. Dave shook his head. What? The sound around them was deafening. Lindsay flipped a page and then turned the red notebook around so Dave could see it. And there was her whole little speech, written out word for word. The last word was thanks, and above it she'd written a number, 27. Dave nodded slowly as he stared at the speech and saw what Lindsay had done. He did the math in his head. 7 plus 7 and carry the 1. She had made the contest an exact tie. 74 points for each team. And their private war to see who got to label the other a loser? Also a tie. Her 27 words matched the illegal ones he had yelled at Mrs. Hyatt. Was it all too perfect? Of course it was. Had Lindsay messed with the score against the boys to make it add up that way? Without a doubt. Would there be a big investigation? Not likely. Dave kept looking at the notebook. Lindsay's speech was filled with cross-outs and changes. She'd chosen those last words so carefully, making each one count. He wanted to say, I owe you big time. He also wanted to say, I guess I'm pretty much of an idiot, aren't I? And most of all, what he wanted to say was what she'd already said. Thanks. But Dave and Lindsay just sat there grinning at each other in the noisy cafeteria, and neither of them said a thing. Not one word. And that is the end, everybody, of No Talking by Andrew Clements. If you are interested in other books by Andrew Clements, oh, I forgot, I was supposed to tell you what I had predicted. I didn't predict nearly as perfect an ending as what Andrew Clements had written, but I did predict that there would be some kind of friendship between Dave and Lindsay, and that would have something to do with whether or not someone got an L written on their forehead, because throughout the book there were little clues that Dave and Lindsay were beginning to understand each other, that they were both recognizing that they were smart kids who enjoyed school, and maybe that boys aren't so awful and that girls aren't so awful. Anyways, I wonder if your prediction lined up or not. It's okay if it didn't. I'm sure it still got you thinking. Okay, so here are some other books by Andrew Clements. Some you may already know. Frindle, Lost and Found, The Report Card, Lunch Money, Room 1, Extra Credit, and those aren't even all of his great books. If you would like to take a quiz on this book, the quiz number is 115396EN. It is a 5th grade level book, and it's worth 4 points. You might want to go back and re-listen to any chapters that maybe you didn't remember quite so clearly. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're all doing well. Bye, everyone.